Mark Lewis, one of the few black employees in a prestigious financial company, has always believed that his hard work and professionalism speak for themselves. He tried to fit in with the corporate culture and felt that he was part of the team. But one evening, while he was working late, he accidentally overheard his colleagues talking in the conference room. At first, he thought it was just a corporate joke, but with every word he said, he knew it was about him. He was met with disparaging comments and crude jokes about how he had been selected for a variety and that people like him were not promoted very far. These words sobered him like a cold shower. Everything he had built with hard work and faith in justice collapsed in a matter of minutes. He realized that his colleagues, whom he considered allies, actually see in him only an exception for a tick. A strong sense of frustration and resentment filled him. Who else in the company thinks the same of him? Mark felt that he had to act to change this situation, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might face the same hypocrisy and bias. If you want to find out how Mark decides to confront these prejudices, stay tuned and follow his story as it unfolds. Mark Lewis was a man who was used to getting things done on his own. Growing up in a small town in the south of the country, he learned early on that success requires more than just talent. He had to make an incredible effort to get out of poverty and become one of the best graduates of his class. His mother, a woman of strict rules and incredible resilience, often told him, "Work twice as hard to get what others get for nothing." This rule became his life philosophy. From a young age, Mark felt that certain expectations were placed on him, but he never complained. He liked the feeling that he could change his fate. At school, he was always respected for his ability to work and perseverance, even if he was not the most popular among his peers. He loved his studies, especially math and analytics, and once promised himself that he would succeed to give his mother the comfort and pride she deserved. Upon entering the university, Mark was faced with a new level of competition. But here, too, he found his way to success, becoming one of the best students on the course. His hard work and attention to detail set him apart from others, and he soon began receiving internship offers from major companies. He was proud that he was able to break through in such a competitive environment, but he also understood that many of his peers did not face the same barriers that he had to overcome. At university, for the first time, he felt what it meant to be in the minority. Many of the students were from well-to-do families, and he knew that being black meant he had to double-check his competence. But it only hardened his character. By the time he graduated from university, he was clearly aware that his path would be more difficult than others, but this did not frighten him. On the contrary, it gave him strength. Mark received a prestigious job offer at a large financial company right after graduation. At that moment, he believed that he had achieved one of his most significant goals. Working in the corporate world was a new challenge for him, and he was eager to show off his abilities. He threw himself into his work, becoming one of the most valuable analysts in the company. His professionalism and perseverance allowed him to cope with the most complex projects, and even his senior colleagues respected him for his talent and ability to solve problems. But the longer Mark worked for the company, the more often he felt that he was different. He was one of the few black employees at a high level, and this made him noticeably different from the rest. He tried to be part of the team, but he always felt a certain distance that seemed to hang between him and his colleagues. They spoke politely to him, supported him in meetings, but were personally distant. Mark knew he didn't belong in this company, but he didn't let it affect his work. Physically, Mark was athletic, thanks to regular sports. He was used to a busy schedule and used training sessions as a way to relieve tension after long working hours. Sports helped him stay focused and calm, even when the work was becoming more difficult and stressful. His self-control and willpower allowed him to cope with the most difficult tasks. In addition, he was calm and balanced, and this quality helped him work with clients who saw him as a reliable professional. Despite all the difficulties, Mark tried not to notice the small troubles that periodically happened due to racial prejudice. For example, once a new client met him in the office and asked when the real analyst would approach them. On another occasion, he was asked if he actually worked on a successful project or if his role was purely formal. In such cases, Mark remained professional, not showing that such words hurt him, and focused on his work. Resentment was building up inside him, but he knew that to show it would be to admit that he cared. Over time, he learned to hide his emotions. This self-control that he had achieved became a kind of protective barrier for him. He rarely shared his personal experiences with anyone, preferring to deal with them on his own. Even his mother, who was always there for him and supported him, didn't know how hard it was for him in the corporate world. Mark didn't want to upset her, so he told her that his work brought him joy and respect. In addition to his work, Mark was actively involved in social projects and supported initiatives aimed at helping young people from low-income families. He remembered how difficult his path had been, and he wanted to help others avoid the same difficulties. In the evenings, he often stayed in his office, planning charity events and developing support programs. His goal was simple: he wanted to create opportunities for those who, like himself, were not born in the simplest environment. But behind all these activities, there was a sense of loneliness. Although he had colleagues, friends, and acquaintances, he knew that none of them could truly understand him. He was a dark-skinned professional in a world where he was perceived differently from others, and although he managed to succeed, it always seemed to him a fragile achievement. He felt that his success should not be perceived as an exception to the rule, and was determined to change the perception of people like him in the corporate environment. The events at the corporate party were the last straw. Sitting in his office after hearing derogatory jokes and biased statements about himself, he realized that the moment had come to change something. Not only did he need to prove his worth, but he also needed to change the company's atmosphere. That night, he swore to himself that he would fight racial prejudice, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of those who would come after him. For Mark, it wasn't just a job. It was a battleground for equal rights and respect. In the next few days after the ill-fated corporate event, Mark felt that something had changed. As soon as he set foot in the office, a sense of distrust of his colleagues came over him, and, as it turned out, with good reason. At the morning meeting, for which he had prepared so carefully, Mark noticed that his ideas were treated with unexpected skepticism. Previously, his analytical conclusions and reports always aroused confidence. They were received with a bang, and clients often spoke about his work with great respect. But now it seemed that his words were being treated as something ordinary and not worth paying attention to. During the meeting, Mark provided an update on the company's key project. He spent a week on them, processing information at the request of a large client and improving the report. But as soon as he finished the presentation, his boss, Mr. Grant, casually remarked, "I'm not sure that's what we're looking for. Let's try to approach this issue from a different angle." Without any comments or suggestions for further development, his report was postponed, and his colleagues immediately moved on to other items on the agenda. It came as a shock to Mark. He had put a lot of effort into developing this report and knew that his calculations were correct. Moreover, he was confident that his solution would actually allow the company to better manage risks. But his opinion was ignored. He sat in a meeting, holding back his emotions, and tried to figure out where this sudden cold attitude came from. But something in the back of his mind told him that what had happened at the corporate party hadn't gone unnoticed, and now he was facing its consequences. Soon, to his surprise, Mark noticed that the atmosphere around him had indeed changed. His colleagues, who had previously greeted him with a smile, were now only superficially polite to him. Invitations to joint lunches disappeared, his discussions became less frequent, and key project tasks were now passed on to other team members. Mark felt as if he were withdrawing from the company, as if he had become an outsider among those who had previously accepted him as one of their own. Mark knew something had to be done. He decided to meet with Mr. Grant to discuss his involvement in the project and understand why he was being excluded from important discussions. The boss met him in his office and listened to Mark with obvious displeasure. His response was polite, but at the same time cold and distant. "Mark, don't worry so much. You're a good analyst, but we all need to grow. Perhaps you should work on teamwork and trust your colleagues more, even if you don't agree with their point of view." These words startled Mark. He was sure that his skills and teamwork were always at a high level, but now that he was openly accused of lacking flexibility and team involvement, he realized that he was perceived differently. The sensation hurt him deeply. All the effort invested in a career now seemed insignificant in the eyes of those who could destroy everything with a single word. The situation escalated when a week later, Mark's colleague, Jason, received a project that Mark had been working on for the past 3 months. Jason was glad of the opportunity, of course, but Mark knew that his skills and knowledge of the project were much deeper, and there was no logical explanation for this decision. He tried to talk to Jason to find out why he was given this project, but Jason just waved it off, saying, "You know, Mark, these are the rules of the game. Maybe it's just my turn to be the center of attention?" This added to Mark's anxiety. It became clear to him that they were not just ignoring him, but actively trying to push him away. He decided to talk to HR to discuss why he was excluded from key processes and try to understand what was happening. However, his visit to HR was fruitless. The HR manager listened politely to his complaints, but noted that such issues are often resolved at the team level. She stressed the importance of trust and teamwork, which sounded like a veiled refusal to help. Mark returned to his office feeling hopeless. He was trying to figure out how it was possible to destroy everything he had spent so long building. And all this because of an evening where he accidentally overheard the conversations of colleagues, having learned about himself what it would be better not to know. He realized that he couldn't put up with this attitude anymore, and he needed to act. But he didn't know where to start or how to handle the situation that was becoming increasingly confusing. Soon, his friend Lisa, who works in the next department, came to his office. She noticed that Mark was depressed and silent, and realizing that something had happened to him, decided to talk to him. Mark opened up to her, told her about what he had heard at the corporate party, about his suspicions and about the changed attitude of colleagues and superiors. Lisa listened to him with understanding and offered to contact the management directly to demand clarification. She stressed that his success speaks for itself, and he has the right to defend his interests. Encouraged by Lisa's support, Mark decided to take a serious step. He sent an official letter to the HR department and the company's management, outlining all the problems he encountered. In the letter, he mentioned how the attitude of his colleagues had changed, how he was being excluded from projects, and how much effort he had put into his work. He called on the company to analyze what is really happening and take steps to create a fairer and more inclusive atmosphere. The answer came back a few days later, but it disappointed Mark. Management responded formally, stating that all employees of the company should work for the common success and that some personal differences should not interfere with teamwork. The response emphasized that at the moment there are no grounds for any changes or special measures. Mark realized that his attempt to deal with the situation within the company had failed. At that moment, he felt trapped. He knew that doing nothing would only strengthen the biased attitude of his colleagues and damage his reputation. Mark realized that if management didn't take action, he would have to deal with it on his own. He decided that he would gather evidence and facts that would help him show how he was being discriminated against and suspended from work. He began to more closely monitor the behavior of colleagues, record cases of neglect, collecting everything that can prove that he is deliberately pushed away. A few weeks later, and Mark was about to lose hope, when suddenly a senior manager from another department, Mr. White, called him. This man had a reputation for being a principled and honest professional who took care of his subordinates and always stood up for justice. In the conversation, Mr. White said that he had heard about the situation that Mark was facing, and offered to meet. He hinted that he already knows about the existing bias, which often goes unnoticed or is hushed up. This was an important sign for Mark. He realized that there are still people in the company who see and understand his problems. At the meeting, Mr. White shared that he himself has repeatedly noticed unfair treatment of black employees and has long tried to implement more inclusive measures in the company. He suggested that Mark join forces and find a way to change the situation together. This meeting gave Mark hope. Now he knew that he wasn't alone and that there was someone who was willing to fight for the truth with him. Mark sat in the conference room across from the company's management, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. He was called to this meeting after the publication of an article exposing cases of hidden discrimination and bias in the company. Now everyone, from employees to shareholders, knew that there were long overdue problems behind the glitz of a prestigious corporation. In the room were not only the CEO and his closest deputies, but also representatives of the legal department and crisis management specialists. Mark was looked at with caution and barely noticeable annoyance, as if he was not an employee, but a problem that needed to be solved as quickly as possible. However, he felt that he had already reached a tipping point. He knew that his position was stronger than ever before. The story gained publicity, and now the company's management could not just sweep it under the carpet. It was forced into action, and Mark was well aware of it. It was the CEO who spoke first, his voice flat, but there was a barely contained tension hidden behind the suave tone. "Mark, we've looked at the situation carefully and we understand that some mistakes were made," he said, trying to maintain a semblance of control. "We want to apologize to you for any inconvenience you have experienced, and we hope that we can find a compromise that will satisfy both parties." The word "certain errors" sounded like an attempt to mitigate the scale of the problem, and this immediately caused Mark to be puzzled. But he did not interrupt, deciding to let the management fully express their intentions. The director then continued, getting to the heart of the sentence. We suggest that you reconsider your role in the company. If you agree to support us in resolving this conflict and contribute to the restoration of the company's reputation, we are ready to offer you a promotion, as well as an increased bonus package. Mark listened carefully to their offer, realizing that the management was trying to settle the conflict by offering him a promotion and a cash reward. They seemed to think they could buy his silence, and perhaps even his loyalty. But for Mark, this question has long ceased to be personal. This was no longer just about his career or financial gain for him, it was a fight for justice that required deeper changes. Steeling himself, he answered. Thank you for your offer, Mark began, looking into the eyes of everyone present. But, frankly speaking, no position and no money will solve the problems of discrimination and bias in the company. I can't accept this offer if it doesn't include actual changes. I don't ask for individual privileges, I want all employees of this company to be able to work in an atmosphere of respect and equality. There was a tense silence in the hall. The management clearly did not expect such a response. Mark saw the CEO narrow his eyes nervously, and the deputies began to look at each other, not knowing how to react. For them, this was a critical situation, their offer was rejected, and now they understood that Mark was aiming for more serious changes. Finally, one of the council members, Mr. Grant, who had previously been Mark's boss, tried to intervene. Mark, you must understand that changes take time and resources. The company always tries to work on improving the corporate culture, but we can't transform everything overnight. Mark paused, feeling a sense of righteous anger building inside him. He could see that his boss was trying to soften the situation, but to him it sounded like just another excuse. I agree, he said, changes take time, but we need to start now. I propose concrete steps that will help the company move towards a more inclusive culture. First of all, it is the creation of an independent group to monitor compliance with the anti-discrimination policy, mandatory training for managers and employees, as well as transparent recruitment and promotion rules. There was a reaction of surprise and even mild annoyance at his words. Board members understood that these proposals would require not only time and money from the company, but also a radical revision of all internal processes that seemed reliable and successful to them. The CEO sighed, looked at Mark, and said, I don't know. We will accept your proposals for consideration, but such radical changes require approval by our shareholders. Do you understand that every step we take has its own impact on the financial condition of the company? Mark knew that for them it was a matter of money, but for him it was a matter of principle. He felt that there was no turning back, and he knew that if he gave up now, nothing would change. He held the CEO's gaze and replied, I don't know. I understand that very well. But don't companies with a good reputation attract more customers and investors? Isn't a fair corporate culture going to help you retain talented employees and build trusting relationships with your customers? These words made everyone in the hall think. Management began to realize that Mark was talking about the deeper benefits that the company could reap by implementing real change. He wasn't just asking for justice, he was talking about the need for changes that would strengthen the company in the long run. At that moment, the meeting room door opened and Mr. White entered. His appearance came as a surprise to everyone, but Mark knew that White would support him. He was one of the few people who openly opposed corporate bias and believed in the value of change. I apologize for interrupting, White began, but I think it's important to say that Mark is not alone in his views. Many employees, including myself, believe that it is necessary to review the values of the company and take measures to ensure that our words correspond to our actions. White's words were an unexpected blow to the management. Mark now had the support of a reputable manager, and their demands could no longer be so easily ignored. The CEO, realizing that the situation was going beyond a simple conflict with a single employee, looked at White and Mark, and then said, I don't know. It seems that we have indeed encountered a serious problem that requires immediate action. That was the end of the meeting. Mark left the conference room with a sense of relief. His position was heard, and now, with the support of White and many employees, he knew that the movement for change had begun. After a tense meeting with the management, Mark felt that he was on the edge. He was well aware that the company would do everything it could to cover up the traces of discrimination and bias, but he now had the evidence, and he wasn't going to back down. Thanks to the help of Mr. White, Mark prepared for further actions aimed at restoring justice. He began to suspect that the situation could go beyond the company and become public knowledge if the management did not change their behavior. The next day, he received an unexpected phone call. On the other end of the line was a representative of a major news agency, who, to Mark's surprise, was aware of his case. The journalist asked Mark with respect and interest about his experience in the company and about the evidence of bias and discrimination collected. Mark was shocked. He did not know how the information could have been leaked outside the company, but the journalist assured him that he had received the data from a reliable source. Moreover, the journalist expressed his willingness to tell his story, promising complete anonymity if Mark decides to give an interview. It was a chance not only to protect himself, but also to draw attention to a systemic problem that he wasn't the only witness to. Mark hesitated. On the one hand, he understood that this could be a powerful weapon against the company, which was already ready to make him a scapegoat. But on the other hand, he was aware that the disclosure of such information could negatively affect his reputation and career in the future. He called Mr. White to discuss his doubts. White listened carefully to Mark and then said, "Mark, I know this is a difficult decision. But look, it's not just your business. Many employees, especially those like you, face similar problems but are afraid to speak up. You can set an example for others and show that bias and discrimination are not the norm, and that it can and should be fought." Mark thought deeply about White's words. This choice required courage, but he realized that he wanted to take a step towards change. He agreed to an interview with a journalist, but with the condition that his name would not be disclosed until the internal investigation was completed. The interview came out a few days later and had the effect of a bombshell. The article was titled "Black Analyst vs. Corporation: A History of Hidden Discrimination." The text described in detail the cases of bias, hidden discrimination and injustice experienced by the company's employees. Anonymous quotes from Mark and other employees highlighted how deep-rooted the problem was. The agency made sure that the story caused a public outcry, and soon it spread on social networks, drawing attention to the company. The management couldn't believe what was happening. They believed that the situation was under control, and an internal investigation would be able to clear all charges. But now that the public's attention was focused on their company, they were in an extremely awkward position. Shareholders and major clients demanded clarification and immediate action from the director. The company's crisis management was not prepared for such a situation, and the management immediately began to take measures to minimize the damage. But the surprises didn't end there. Soon, Mark received a call from the legal department asking him to meet with the CEO in person. At the meeting, he was expected not only by the director, but also by several shareholders who were clearly concerned about the situation. They immediately informed Mark that the company was ready to offer him compensation and review his position if he agreed to maintain a positive image of the company in the media. Mark listened to this suggestion with surprise, not believing that the management decided to hush up the case in this way. But now he had enough confidence to answer. He firmly stated that financial compensation and a promotion would not eliminate the problem of systemic bias that he and other employees face on a daily basis. He demanded not only a public apology, but also concrete steps to create an inclusive and fair work environment, mandatory training on anti-discrimination policies, a review of hiring policies, and increased monitoring of compliance with corporate values. The management of the company was stunned by his words, but Mark understood that now he was supported by public opinion and he was no longer alone in this fight. After a long and intense meeting with management, Mark and Mr. White felt that they had laid the groundwork for change. Their demands could no longer be ignored. The support that Mark received not only from employees, but also from the public, turned him into a voice of change in the company. This was a signal to management: either they will seriously review the corporate culture, or they risk losing the reputation and trust of their customers and shareholders. Several weeks after the meeting were devoted to the creation of an initiative group that reviewed corporate processes. The company's management, realizing the gravity of the situation, appointed an independent consultant to conduct a detailed analysis of the company's structure, with a focus on internal processes related to recruitment policies, career development, and compliance with anti-discrimination standards. For Mark, this was the first step towards creating a transparent system. He gladly accepted the offer to join this group as a representative of employees, and also insisted that it include people from different departments and levels of the company. From the very beginning, Mark and his colleagues faced many questions and challenges. Employees who were previously unable to express their opinions openly now got a chance to share their experience. At the first meetings, They talked about situations when their opinions and suggestions were ignored, about cases of bias on the part of management, about the difficulties associated with moving up the career ladder. These stories not only showed that the problem was deeper than initially thought, but also helped Mark understand that he was not alone in his quest to change the system. One of the most important steps was the introduction of mandatory trainings for employees at all levels, aimed at awareness and elimination of bias. These trainings were conducted by experienced professionals and included training modules on a culture of inclusivity, understanding racial and social stereotypes, and responding appropriately to discriminatory incidents. Management, in turn, has also committed to training and engaging in regular discussions with employees to better understand their concerns and expectations. Mark saw how these meetings became an occasion for honest dialogue, which was previously impossible due to hierarchy and corporate boundaries. Together with Mr. White and independent consultants, Mark also proposed a new principle for the company: transparency of processes. They developed a policy that all stages of hiring, promoting, and distributing projects should be documented, and employees could request an explanation for any of these decisions. This helped to create a foundation for transparency in the company and eliminate the opacity that made Mark and other employees feel excluded from the corporate culture. Not all employees immediately accepted the changes with enthusiasm. Some managers expressed doubts, considering that these new measures unnecessarily complicate the workflow. But Mark was prepared for this resistance. He knew that change rarely came easily, especially when it involved deep-rooted habits and principles. He and Mr. White persevered, continuing to explain that all these steps are aimed at creating a healthy and productive work environment where every employee feels important and respected. The first fruits of these changes became noticeable within a few months. Thanks to the new recruitment process and transparent promotion conditions, the company has a stream of talented specialists from different cultural and professional backgrounds. Newcomers said that the decision to choose this particular company was due to its open and inclusive corporate culture, which they learned about from the news and social networks. This was quite an achievement for Mark. He saw how his struggle was beginning to produce results. Colleagues who had previously felt isolated began to work more confidently, knowing that their voice would now be heard. Mr. White, who also played a key role in these changes, became a symbol of support and wise leadership, and many employees began to turn to him for advice and help. However, the most important moment for Mark was that the company officially apologized to him for the injustice. At the annual employee meeting, the CEO gave a public speech acknowledging the mistakes of the past and thanking Mark for his courage and commitment to justice. This was not an easy step for the management, but they understood that without recognition, their apologies would remain only words. For Mark, this recognition was a symbol of victory, but he knew that this was only the beginning of the road. A public apology and internal reform meant that he had done everything he could to change the system, but there was still a lot of work to be done. Now his goal was to ensure that the company continued to follow its new values and did not deviate from the planned path. After some time, Mark was offered to become a consultant on inclusion and equity issues to help other companies implement similar programs and develop an inclusive corporate culture. He gladly accepted the offer, seeing it as an opportunity to share his experience and help others avoid the mistakes that he himself had encountered. Mark became a symbol not only for his colleagues, but also for many other people who learned his story. His example has inspired hundreds of people to fight for their rights and strive for a better work environment. It's been a year since Mark Lewis decided to speak out against the system. This year has been a challenge for him, but also a time of personal and professional growth. Mark was able not only to improve the conditions for himself and his colleagues, but also to initiate changes that now served as the basis for creating a fairer and more inclusive corporate culture. The company, once closed and biased, was now known as one of the most progressive and inclusive places to work in its industry. New employees who joined after the reform said they chose the company because of its new values and openness. For Mark, this was the best recognition of his efforts, to see how his efforts affect the company and its reputation, attracting a variety of talents from all over the country. The press, which initially criticized the company, now celebrated its success, telling how the culture of openness and support improved productivity and led to higher profits. For Mark, this was a significant stage in his life. Instead of leaving the company after the crisis ended, he decided to stay on to continue developing the changes. He was appointed as a consultant on issues of inclusivity and equity, not only within the company, but also in projects for other organizations seeking to follow its example. He was also offered the position of chairman of the Internal Corporate Values Committee, which included representatives from all departments. This committee made sure that each employee felt part of the team, had an opportunity for growth, and was protected from bias and injustice. Mark enthusiastically took on the role, realizing that he now has the opportunity to make a lasting impact on the corporate culture. Internal changes also inspired Mark and Mr. White to launch a new mentoring program for young professionals from underappreciated communities. This program helped talented graduates who often face barriers to employment to find their place in the market and develop their career. Mark and his colleagues invited young professionals for internships and offered long-term development programs. They saw it not only as an opportunity to find future employees, but also as a chance to create a new generation of professionals who would push the ideas of inclusivity and equity further. For Mark, this was an important part of his mission to open doors for people who might otherwise have gone unnoticed in the corporate environment. The changes in the company itself also became an important signal for other employees. Those who had previously felt isolated or forgotten now felt that their voice really mattered. One day, Mark was approached by a colleague whom he had known for several years and thanked him for the work he had done. "You probably don't know this, but thanks to your actions, I finally feel that I can be myself in this office," he said. Mark realized that his struggle was not only for his own sake, but also for the sake of others who were waiting for changes, but did not dare to demand them. On a personal level, Mark felt more confident and calm than ever. All the trials that he had to go through gave him invaluable experience and strengthened his self-confidence. He had once thought that his voice didn't matter, but now he knew that he could make a difference. He was grateful to Mr. White and those colleagues who supported him in the most difficult moments and encouraged him to continue fighting. Thanks to their support, Mark became not just an analyst, but a person who was able to change the company and create favorable conditions for future generations of employees. Inspired by his experience, Mark began writing about his journey and sharing the story of changes in the corporate culture. His articles, published on professional platforms and blogs, discussed ways to improve the corporate environment, methods of supporting employees, and ways to build an inclusive culture. These articles soon became popular among professionals, and were read and commented on by executives from other companies. Gradually, he was approached by companies interested in implementing such changes, with offers to speak at conferences or become a consultant. For Mark, this was an opportunity to bring his ideas to a wide range of people, inspire them to fight for equality and, possibly, change the corporate world. Over time, he decided that his experience could be useful not only in his company, but also outside of it. His example and success inspired him to create a small social organization that helped young professionals adapt to the work environment, develop professional skills, and find resources to build a career. He truly believed that his story could help those who felt undervalued or were afraid of facing bias. His goal was to convey to them that they are not alone, and that this can be fought. Looking back, Mark saw what a long way he had come from the moment he decided to fight for justice. He recalled moments when he doubted success, when others looked at him with bewilderment, and the management tried to bribe his silence. Now it seemed like a distant past, a lesson that had helped him grow stronger. He understood that change is possible if you believe in your beliefs, act decisively and do not stop in the face of difficulties. Over time, Mark became a well-known figure in the corporate environment, and his story inspired hundreds of people to make changes. He began to speak at professional events and conferences, sharing his experience and methods of implementing inclusivity. Through it, other companies have begun to recognize the importance of an inclusive environment where every employee feels important and respected.